Welcome back to the 420 Chief podcast, where we share veteran stories of healing, raise awareness to the veteran suicide crisis, and highlight safer, healthier, real world paths to recovery. Today's conversation is not just a powerful one, but one that I'm very excited about, very educational. I'm sitting down with Steve Philpott Jr., a former active duty Marine turned scientist, professor, and performance consultant whose journey takes us from combat injury and opioid prescriptions to cutting edge research in human performance, cannabis science, and the endocannabinoid system. This isn't just a story, it's a deep dive into recovery, resilience, and what real healing can look like when we start asking the right questions. So, with that said, we'll dive right in and welcome Steve. Welcome, man. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thank you for having me. Am I heard?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you just fine. And thank you so much for agreeing to come on and share not just your story, but some of the information that you've learned along the way. I feel is so beneficial for not just veterans, but anybody who's curious about cannabis, the intentional use of cannabis, and actually helping themselves. So, welcome, and let's just dive right in. Do you want to tell us just a little bit about your background before service and what led you to join the Marine Corps?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born and raised in Chicago. I was born at South Chicago Hospital. It's called something different now. Um, my family is kind of made up, like a lot of people's family, different people from different places. I got grandparents from the South. My mom's family is from the Midwest. But something interesting about my family is my great grandmother owned a boat club in like the 1930s and 40s. And at the time, if you were black, you couldn't boat at certain boat clubs. So she worked with the Coast Guard back in the 1930s. And she had a strategic checkpoint from the Little Calumet River, which is a checkpoint between the Mississippi River and Lake Michigan. So a long time ago, since World War One, I found out that everybody in my family has been a part of some initiative, some operation, even just my grandmother locally being a civilian member working with the Coast Guard. So that's kind of like my family's like history and backstory. I grew up all over, but that was the one location my family always had was my grandmother's boat club on the water. So I kind of grew up on boats, and who would have thunk I'd end up deployed on one?
That's amazing. Grew up with a family of mission, it sounds like. That's awesome.
Yeah. It's pretty cool, and like that's obviously the general kind of backstory of my history. But I played sports in high school. I got some concussions in high school. Didn't really at the time know anything about that. Got in a real bad accident in high school right after a football game. Things you think about later on in life that you don't think about. But I was at the time like I wouldn't say I was a reckless football player, but I was aggressive. I liked hitting. It was fun to me. And back then they didn't tell you not to hit with your head. Um, so
No.
I, you know,
You knock the off of somebody if you're gonna hit them. Friday Night Lights, I would tell my son that I'm like, "If you're gonna hit him, knock that helmet off. Let them know that you hit them, and they'll be scared."
right. So, back then they used to tell you like hit people in the ear hole. Now we know that's terrible. Don't do that. Do not hit somebody right in the ear hole. But I remember being concussed. I remember seeing friends concussed on the field. I remember like guys in high school getting carted off. Like my team went to the Final Four in high school for our state. So we were like one game away from the state championship. So it was pretty intense, like playing football. And I just remember at one point being like, as teenagers, we are getting beat up. Like guys had college scholarships, and I was like, are they going to be able to play in college based on all the injuries they had in high school? Um, so I took an athletic training class in high school while I was playing football, and I was like, man, I'd love to be an athletic trainer, but to be honest, I did not have the GPA. I
Right.
looked up what it took to be an athletic trainer, and I was like,
Not for me.
man, that seems cool. I'd love to be on the sideline of sports, but like I don't think that's for me. I tried college for one semester, flunked out. I had a lot of stuff going on in my home life. Between me finding out I had narcolepsy later on in life in my 30s, and growing up around like alcoholism as a child, my grades were just not good enough for college. Like a lot of people in the military was really like, as much as I love being able to say I served and I protected my family and my country and my neighborhood. For a lot of us, it's a last chance place for people. You know
I
what I
feel
mean?
that. I feel that because I did do a year of college, and it wasn't for me. I didn't love school until after the military, where I was like, I appreciate sitting in a classroom.
Yeah, I did one semester. That was it. I did one semester of college. I think I missed a final, and on a technicality, my grade went from a B to an F because if you miss a final,
Yeah.
but it was just something I wasn't educated on. I didn't know the final was on a different day than the normal class. My teacher was like, "Hey, you'll never forget this for the rest of your life. You need this," and she handed me my F, and I was like, uh. My mom was like, "Hey, we love you, but you're a young man and you got to figure out something else to do." Because here in Chicago, you can get into the wrong thing at 18 years old if you're flunking out of college and you grew up around alcoholism and stuff. Um, so yeah, in 2009, I joined the Marines. I went straight active duty. I don't even remember what was going on at the time, but I know that in 2008, I think Obama just got elected. And being from Chicago, I remember they had an influx of people going into the military. So you know how they always do like the push, put the drawdown, then the push. We're bringing people in, we're kicking people out. So I went in during one of those. Hey, we need people. Like we need people today. So I literally talked to a recruiter and I told my mom, "Hey, next week I'm leaving." And she was
Wow.
just like, she's like, "What? What's going on?" Blah blah. And I called each day. I called one of my friends and I was like, "Hey, don't look for me. I'm leaving." It was one of those, like I was ready to leave Chicago behind, you know what I mean? And it was like I remember the girl I dated, she was furious. It was just like, dude, I like dumped my former life essentially. You know what I mean?
Goodbye.
But I'll be honest, in boot camp, it made me a it made me an intense person. I'm gonna put it nicely.
I believe that. Boot camp definitely changes a person. I remember I thought I was funny when I went into boot camp, and I learned real quick I'm not funny anymore. I'm like,
Man, I thought I had poise over like the Hulk that I used to have in football. You know what I mean? I always thought I had control over it. And boot camp in Marines is 3 months, 90 days, no phones like people have nowadays, no social media. You call your parents on day one, screen the message that's on the paper, and then you disappear. I went into boot camp 212. I came out 165 in 90
wow,
days.
that's quite a drop. Yeah, you definitely don't
I
have access to the weights and the diet that you used to, for sure.
I got in trouble for not eating in boot camp because of how hard we were working. Like they were just like, "Yo, when you came in at an extra large, we switched you to a medium. Like we switched your camos twice." And to be honest, in boot camp, I was just like, I was a teenager. I was pissed at the world, and I was like, "Oh man, I'm gonna let it all out." You know what I mean? And at the same time, I had a little sister that was born in 2001. So my mom was pregnant when 9/11 happened, and she worked in downtown Chicago and the Sears Tower, which is the tallest building in the United States. She was pregnant and had to walk down the stairs because they evacuated all of downtown Chicago, pregnant with my little sister. So for me, I was too young in 2001 to join, but literally 2008, I graduated high school. 2009, I was active duty.
Wow. So, after boot camp, what, training school did you go through? What did you do in the Marine Corps?
Yeah, so I was a 2131. I think the technical term was a towed artillery systems technician. I worked on cannons. I worked on 777 howitzers. I worked on the old 9 or 8 cannons, and I worked on not 155s. I forgot the smaller ones. 105s, the smaller mortars. So I did that. Had a full battery of guns to myself. I went in boot camp, went to like regular like MCT, and then they sent me to my job school, and then they were just like, "Hey, PFC, check this out." You know how most people go somewhere and there's a corporal to train you, and there's a sergeant to train him, and a staff sergeant. They were like, "You have one of the smallest jobs in the Marine Corps. So your rank is going to be PFC, but you're going to have the ability of a staff sergeant. You can't mess up from the jump." I was like, "Yeah, no pressure."
Immediate
Cool.
situational authority is what we called that in the Navy. You might have a lower rank, but you have a high responsibility, situational authority.
Yeah, so it very quickly that like boot camp, because we always talk about boot camp, but we know boot camp is training. Boot camp is initiation. Boot camp is a building, breaking and building process. The fleet is different.
Way
And
different.
I think like, yeah, being active duty, once that happens and it's just like, hey, no, so you're in charge of these cannons. And these cannons have to be operational because you're in a combat unit and your combat unit has to be combat ready. And like my friends are in college and Facebook is getting popular on social media. And I'm over here like 2 a.m. in the morning under a cannon, making sure it can fire because I'm a PFC and my sergeant major told me them guns better fire because we gotta do a field op for the general. And I'm just like, damn, bro, I'm 19 years old. You know what I'm saying? Like, but I understood my responsibility. And as you can see, I like comics. So it was like okay, with great power comes great responsibility. Like, cool. You get to be in the same rooms with staff sergeants as a PFC, but you also got to be humble because if you mess up and those guns don't work, everybody who works on the guns brings the ammo. Your whole unit is like, oh, gun 6 is down. That PFC must not be doing his job. It was literally all or nothing for me.
That's a big deal and a lot of responsibility. I think a lot of folks have a hard time resonating with. I know that hit me really hard when I got out of the service and I was working in IT, and I realized the problems there as a civilian. Like if a server goes down, there's no lives at risk, but people treat it as, people are running like this is a big deal. I'm like, this isn't that big a deal. But in the military, a lot of the responsibilities are life and death situations. So it really is a big deal.
Yeah, quite literally. I'll never forget. We used to obviously do field ops. We go out in the woods for 2 weeks, a month, 2 months, and just train the same way we would if we were deployed. And we were in the middle of training and shooting. The cool thing was when I did my job well, everybody knew because all the guns were firing.
Right.
So when I did my job well, I actually took every course that you need to be like an unofficial 0811, which is an actual artillery move. So although I was just an artillery technician, when I did my job really well and all the guns were firing, I wasn't just sitting around. Look at me. You think they're just gonna let me sit around? They're like, yo, bro, you're too big. Like, help us out. So I used to throw artillery rounds. I used to pick up those 100-pound 155 rounds. I throw them. I went through all the courses that they had to take because honestly, I just wanted the respect of my unit. And through doing that, knowing everything about the cannon, how to operate it, work it, and be able to fix it, that was when I got a lot more comfortable, in my role and my responsibility. And thank God, because right around that time in 2011, my unit got emergency orders on a random Friday, just chilling at work, went to formation, and we got emergency orders to deploy to Libya in response to the Libyan civil war. I believe it was called Operation Odyssey Dawn originally, and then it got switched to Operation Unified Protector. I think that's it. It's up there. It's from NATO. But the unit before us that had just got back from deployment had taken a loss. And I remember being there on the street of our unit the day we found out that people got hit. And I was just like, whoa, that just changed the whole street, like everybody.
Yeah, this is
So
what we're
obviously,
doing.
yeah, so they come back from their deployment and then they came back from somewhere else. They came back from Afghanistan. But I was just like, yo, we're going to Libya. We don't even know anything about this. This is new. This is fluid. I remember the last thing I told my mom before I deployed, I said, please don't watch the news.
Yeah, that's
Because I
scary.
was like, this is new. I'm a part
It's
of
scary
something
when you
new.
don't know what to expect, especially when you see that unit before you coming back after taking casualties, because all you hear is you hear about it, you hear rumors, all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, it was at that point, I was actually injured right before my deployment. So I was running, we were on like a PT run. There was a giant hole in the ground full of water. Of course, I didn't think about it. I'm thinking, oh, it's a shallow hole. That thing was like 2 feet deep.
Oh,
So I
no.
step in the puddle like it's a, another step. And I remember my rolling my ankle crazy bad. I keep going. We're just crazy in my unit. Like artillery, you know what I'm saying? Like we were supporting infantry. That was always kind of our, we were a combat unit. So being physical was crazy important. And when I was in boot camp, it was the first time I'd ever executed mind over matter, actually manifested it, actually tried to do it, actually been in a position like they're not gonna let me stop. How far can I go? And that's how I got from 212 to 165 in 3 months. But
Wow.
every single day I was like, oh, I can do anything physically. You know what I mean? Like mentally is my issue. I gotta, and the Marines push you on rest, put you on a meal plan. You go to sleep at the same time every day. You do martial arts, you jog. As much as people joke about us as Marines, not only are we one of the only branches who know our birthday, but in boot camp, they make you learn the history of every single war and every single operation that the Marine Corps has ever been a part of. And you have to test on it while being fatigued from all this training. So for me, it was one of those like I felt like mentally, as much as I struggled in school my whole life, the Marine Corps made me feel sharp physically and mentally. And that was something that I carry with me because they gave me an option right before we deployed. They said, do you want to leave and not go on deployment and we find somebody else to take your job and you stay here, or do you want to go? And I was like, dude, those are my cannons. Like nobody knows the cannons like I do. They don't always work well. This is Marine Corps gear. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Sometimes I know how to, do something different and get it working. So I made the decision, with a bad ankle to go on deployment. And it turned out that, in hindsight, my ankle was fractured when I went on deployment. And while we were deployed, I ended up getting 2 cortisone injections in my ankle. At one point, when we came back from Djibouti, Africa, and in like a really rocky, hilly training exercise, my foot was stuck in my boot because I was sleeping in my boot, and it just swelled, and my ankle swelled up every night. So I'm on deployment, walking around pretty much like it felt like a peg leg. It was kind of just numb. And I was just like, bro, don't quit. Definitely don't quit on deployment. If you were gonna quit, the time to quit was before you came to
Yep.
another country and going in war zones. You know what I mean? So I worked really hard on deployment, pushed through. I ended up getting meritoriously promoted because of it. I was picked by a chain of command. I went on a board. I had everything on paper. My guns worked as much as possible. And they ended up promoting me. But when we came back from deployment, it was really hard. There was a Marine from my unit who actually took his life in our barracks right before we deployed. So it kind of like it was an odd way to leave, right? Then while we were deployed, his father took his life. And I think like when you know your guys, you know what I mean. Like you've been out in the woods with them, like hey, he's a badass dude. You know what I'm saying? He had some trauma. We wish we could have got him help. His dad, I was like, whoa, what? So we're on deployment. You know what I'm saying? Trying to be present, but also it's just like, yo, he died from legal pills. He died from opioids.
And that's
So
something
it was
that's
it's
something
hard to
we can
process
face.
that, you know what I mean, on deployment.
It really is. That's a hard way to go into it, both mentally and physically from your perspective, and something that I hope our listeners, take away is that's not uncommon that opioids are prescribed to so many service members, but they're also putting service members at risk of suicide.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was honestly my introduction to suicide. That was the first time, like, you've heard about it on the news, somebody else's family, but that was like somebody I was cool with. You know what I mean? Like that was somebody who I'd been out with. You know what I'm saying? Like hung out. We went out.
Oh, no.
Y'all good?
I got you
Can you
back.
hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. But that was like one of my guys. You know what I mean? But like once he passed, I remember times of him like asking people like for help. You know what I'm saying? And we none of us were trained. None of us were in a position. You know what I'm saying? Like you talking about people who are dry scooping Jack 3D on a 100-degree day in the desert. Like you know what I'm saying? So afterwards, we came back from deployment. Two people after deployment took their lives. So at that point, I actually got a little paranoid, and I was like, I think somebody's killing us.
Yeah.
I'm gonna just be honest with you. So when I came back from deployment, my leg's broken. I'm thinking about the guy who died before deployment and the two people who just died post deployment. And now they're telling me my leg's broken, and guess what they need to give me after my surgery?
Opioids.
Probably like legit the most paranoid I've ever been in my life. I was like, no to everything. Like, no surgery, no medicine, like, no. And I'm an intelligent person as much as I was emotional at the time. And, they showed me the x-rays and they was like, this is your tibia and this is your fibula. These are your lower leg bones. They should be here. Yours are here. And I was like, oh shit, that's what's hurting. And they were like, yeah, we need to like reduce the fracture and put them closer together and then put some screws through there so that it doesn't move anymore. And I was like, wait. I've never been injured in my life other than concussions. I played football. In boot camp, I was a squad leader. You know what I'm saying? Like physical performance is part of my identity. And you telling me you're about to put a plate in my leg and then give me opioids? So on top of all of that, when my unit came back, we did what's called disbanding. And for anybody who doesn't know what disbanding is, I'll explain that to you. When we came back from deployment, they got my unit together, the unit before you, I just told you about that he got hit, and every unit that was a part of 3rd Battalion, 10th Marines. We had a ceremony and rolled up our flags and said goodbye to each other, and everybody went different ways. So I went to a non-deployable unit because I was broken. I was a broken Marine, essentially, non-usable anymore. And this unit right here, they made me this beautiful plaque. They kind of took me in as a shut-in. And for 30 days, I stayed in the barracks by myself in the dark, and somebody would drop off chow hall food while I took my opioids.
Man, I bet that was you want to talk to us about how was that like a dark time in your life? Like how were you feeling at that moment?
I mean, I guess ignorance is bliss when you're young, because like to be honest, I was just like a meathead doing push-ups, you know what I'm saying? And there with a broken ankle. But my what do they say, your breakthrough kind of comes during your breakdown.
Yeah.
The day after my surgery, somebody has to watch you. So another guy in my unit was like, hey, you come to my house, you can stay on the couch, you know what I mean? And I'll be the legal person who monitors you. And I was like, thanks, man, because I don't have any family nearby. He was like, cool. He picks me up for surgery. I'm obviously loopy. I can't feel my leg because they paralyze your leg for surgery and then it wears off afterwards. He was like, hey, man, you got to take this medicine. The doctor told me you got to take this. And I was like, bro, I'm not taking that. Get that out of my I was rude to him in his house. You know what I mean? I'm like, high off the meds. That kills Sean, man. I'm not taking that. It's my best Punisher impression. But what I realized was as the nerve block wore off, I was starting to feel the surgery with no drugs because I wouldn't take the Percocet. I was afraid. I went to sleep one night and woke up scratching. Like I've never scratched like that before. And I called my friend. I said, dude, your dog's got fleas, man. And he was just like, hey, bro, you just had surgery. Calm down. Like my dog doesn't have fleas. And then I started looking up effects of surgery. And I reached down. I said, oh my God, I can feel a plate in my ankle. And I kind of freaked out a little bit. So what did I do? I took one Percocet. One Percocet reduced my pain from like a 10 to like a 5. Okay. That didn't last throughout the day. The bottle said take Percocet as needed. They gave me 90 at a time. What did I do? I'm gonna take 2. Taking 2 Percocet took the pain from a 10 to like a 3. But the only issue is it didn't last through the whole night, and I woke up in the middle of the night. Three Percocet. Three Percocet takes away the pain, and I can sleep through the night. So now I'm taking three Percocet daily for 30 days, sitting around by myself. And I started having nightmares. I started having hallucinations. I was like, I couldn't figure out if I was awake or if I was sleeping. I was just tripping. Honestly, I was really messed up. And one of my friends, he is my business partner, Earl Lawrence, say him by name. We have a consulting company together. He was in college like 4 hours away. He said, "Hey man," and this is to tell everybody this, that moment when you're like, should I try cannabis or not? I knew Marines who got messed up. Their careers were messed up because they tried cannabis. He told me, he said, if you don't like the way that you feel right now in your body, there are other options to help you feel differently. He didn't say better. He didn't say worse. He just said, if you don't like how you feel right now, there are other options to help you feel differently. And I went to his house. He saw me like taking my Percocet and everything. And I was like, bro, I'm terrified of these pills. And he brought me a 6-foot bong, a gas mask, a half milk cart cut in half, a gravity bong, and a joint. And they had a party while I was like sitting there on the couch with my foot up in my boot. And they got me high. And for 3 days, I didn't take my Percocet. I slept a lot. I ate a lot, but I didn't need my Percocet. And in that moment, I was just like, my grandfather had cancer and he got arrested for smoking weed while he had cancer. Now we know cancer helps people that have, going through chemotherapy with nausea. All that to say, I was just like, wait, bad doesn't always mean illegal, and good doesn't always mean legal. Those prescription pills that killed my friend were legal, and I think that they're bad. This cannabis that is illegal just helped me, and it helped my friend who had cancer and my grandfather that had cancer. I would consider those good. And I had this like conundrum, you know what I mean? That kind of moment, just like, oh, I don't think I can unsee this. And yeah, finished my Marine Corps career, everything, you know what I mean? But when it was time to re-up, they were drawn down. That's what I talked about earlier. When they bring a lot of people in, when I went to re-enlist, they were like, dude, we got rid of your unit because they literally are making the military, they're making the Marines smaller right now. I was like, oh. I was like, well, can I go to college full time and stay active duty? Because I would love to do both. And they were like, we can't promise you that. It's the same way you got deployed randomly on a Friday. If you were in school, you'd have to leave. And I was just like, oh man, that kind of sucks.
Yeah.
So I'd taken some classes while I was still active duty, and I decided, I met a kid when I was deployed in Djibouti. He had this big U.S. history book, and I was like, "What do you know about U.S. history?" And the dude explained every president of the United States without opening the book, and I was looking at the book to confirm what he was saying was true. And I was just like, "How does this little kid in the desert know more about U.S. history than me?" And I kind of felt like I'd been taking advantage of my education. Like I hadn't really, what did the kids say? Locked in. I hadn't locked in. I hadn't really like, I was like, okay, I got a GI Bill. I'm going to take one shot to invest in myself. My body is broken right now. The thing I've always used, I'm going to use my mind, maybe for the first time, post Marine Corps career. I'm going to use my mind and I'm going to invest into myself. And that was the jump from my Marine Corps career and that injury and my opioid experience and having a dependency to experiencing cannabis, going back to school and being like, hey, I know I can help other people. I just don't know how exactly.
That's a powerful story, and super grateful for your friend in college that introduced you to the original form of healing, and I like that the way that you framed that. It's not the only option, but there are other options because that's so important for people to hear because it's not just about the options, it's really about hope in the end, you know? So, talk to us a little bit more about, your schooling and, what you started off learning your subjects in school.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, when I came back and I would go up to schools and I would go in person. It's so interesting how remote everything is now. I would go to schools in person. I would set up meetings with people who had programs I was interested in, athletic training, personal training, sports medicine. I quickly learned, I was like, sports medicine, you need to be a doctor. Athletic training, I don't have the academic like backing to become an athletic trainer. And I was just like, man, what do I know? And I was like, in the Marines, I learned the mind body connection. I learned mind over matter. Like, I learned that anybody in any circumstance can push themselves and will themselves to do anything. You know what I mean? It just takes a whole lot of attention and intention. And I'm just like, that's when I was just like, oh, I could be a good personal trainer. I think I'd be a great personal trainer. And honestly, that's what I did. So I enrolled at Prairie State College. It's in like the south suburbs of Chicago. I got my associates in fitness and exercise, and I got a personal trainer certification and a group trainer certification. Before I went out, I was training athletes, working with these pro athletes. I was training people's grandmas. I was training people with Alzheimer's. I was training people with dementia and Parkinson's. We consider it's called special populations, but it was just people with ailments. And for that to be my first population, having played sports, having been in the military, it kind of changed how I saw training. I was like, some of these people are training to survive, to stay alive, the same way I was training to stay alive and survive when I was active duty. I just got to be able to reframe it and appreciate this dude's 78. He served in Vietnam. You know what I'm saying? He's an older guy. However, he deserves the attention that I felt like I deserved when I was active duty right now as a personal trainer. And I think it made me a good personal trainer. Like, some of my clients back then actually, once I left those jobs, they became friends. And I really liked being a personal trainer. However, when you start working at corporate gyms and I'm sure you see LA Fitness and Planet Fitness, and I worked at some gyms here in Chicago, and I was just kind of like, man, social media is making fitness a little I don't know the appropriate word for this podcast, but it's getting a little nasty. You know what I mean? Like, fitness it's not about just, be the best version of yourself anymore. Like, go as hard as you can go until you can't go anymore. Now there's like, I saw supplements going crazy. People using unregulated supplements and recommending them to people. So I'm like, man, I just went to school. Like, I had to get certifications. There's legal implications to what I tell people, what I say, what I do, what I recommend. I'm not a nutritionist. I can't give nutritional advice legally. And I see people on social media just with their opinions, keyword of this whole podcast, opinions, with their opinions kind of spewing hate. So, paleo sucks, keto. And I'm just like, we're getting way too much information too fast, and everybody's arguing. I mean, look at where we are now. This was obviously a long time ago. So I decided that I didn't just want to be a personal trainer, that I wanted to go ahead and get a bachelor's degree. So I went to UIC, University of Illinois at Chicago, and I got my bachelor's degree in kinesiology and exercise science with a minor in nutrition. And that took me from just knowing how to be a personal trainer to the science of the human body, biology, how your genes turn into proteins, how those proteins work in cells, how those cells help you function. Like, I was like, the science behind our bodies and fitness and health and performance. As much as we're interested in technology, I look at the body as like God's technology. I'm gonna be honest with you. Like, it is the most awesome thing to be able to study, to be able to go like, hey, this person's sick until they did exercise 3 times a week for 30 minutes at a moderate intensity. We monitored their heart rate, their blood pressure, and all their vitals are better after 3 months of doing that. That's one of the coolest things in the world to be able to do without giving anybody injections, supplements, even advice. I just need you to show up and just spend time with me because you paid me to do it. So we're gonna do it together. And when I got my bachelor's degree in kinesiology, seeing what was happening in personal training, I decided to become a collegiate strength conditioning coach.
And for our listeners, can you explain exactly what that is?
Yeah, so think about like a personal trainer. Obviously, you work at a gym. You can do group fitness classes where you have like 10 people come and you do circuits, or you can do one-on-one sessions with people. A collegiate strength conditioning coach, at least in the NCAA, They have to have a bachelor's degree in sports science, some type of sports related field, and then they have to get a certification. Mine is through the NSCA, National Strength Conditioning Association. There's also some other organizational bodies that you can get certified through. So I had to get all these certifications so that I could coach at the college level, because there's a lot of different implications between coaching a small group fitness class and coaching a weight room where you have, 100 plus 18 to 22-year-old college men, some of them with 500, 600 pounds on their back, and there's music loud, and you only got 30 minutes to do this because the head coach expects you to have this wrapped up and on the field. And I was like, wait, this is like the Marines. This is exactly like the Marines.
That's
This is
awesome.
this is a performance. You know what I mean? Like, they give you scripts, they give you schedules, there's expectations. So for me, I was like, even with my broken body post Marine Corps, because it was a struggle as a strength coach. We got egos, man. Like, nobody wants to hear about your broken body. People say thank you for your service, but I don't care that you can't squat 415 anymore. And I'm just like, bro, don't do that. You know what I mean?
Especially
So
now.
for me, yeah. So that's where it was just kind of like, I love doing strength conditioning. I was an intern at Northwestern. That's my football from my first win. I was an intern at Northwestern. I worked at UIC, Chicago State. Also worked with a lot of pro athletes just on the side, and that's kind of where I spent really 8 years of my career doing that. And during COVID, I was a strength conditioning coach at Chicago State University, and that kind of changed everything because NCAA games were getting canceled. When you're around college athletes, they get sick a lot. You can't fly in airports. And I was just like, man, I don't know if the NCAA is going to actually survive COVID. Then Stanford canceled, they canceled sports. Stanford got rid of sports. I said, Stanford? You mean Stanford? Like money Stanford? And I was just like, oh, I need to make sure that I have another, opportunity for myself. So I decided that I was going to become a sports scientist. And then I left the NCAA and became a sports scientist for a company called Stat Sports. And I ended up hooking up these sensors to athletes' vests that they wear under their jerseys while they're playing. You get heart rate, how high they jump, how fast they jump. If they get hit, what's the G-force? What's the impact of the hit? How hard is the initial hit? How hard is the hit to hit the ground? How long does it take them to get back vertical? And are they stable when they're vertical? I can get all that information through one device. And I'm just like, could you imagine if we had something like this when we were active duty?
Right.
What? You know what I mean? Your VA claim might go through a little easier because you got a whole bunch of, data and performance.
I don't know what the Marines would do with that, though, Steve.
So when I get to where I am, where I was recently, I actually found a way to connect those and make that possible. So again, sports scientist for a couple of years, same thing kind of going on. You remember COVID came back a second time. I ended up leaving my sports science job and decided that I wanted to get another degree. This time, the reasoning behind me getting my master's was when I was coaching as a strength conditioning coach, I had a license through the state of Illinois to be a medical cannabis patient. So not only could I consume and go to a dispensary before it was recreationally legal, I had a license to grow in my house, which at the time I did. So I was growing plants, consuming, and going to a dispensary. And if any of the athletes that I was coaching did any of the things I did, they'd be breaking the law and lose their scholarship, be on maybe ESPN, be publicly embarrassed and ridiculed, and probably change kind of the trajectory of their career. And I was like, damn, that's hypocritical. You know what I'm saying? But as a strength conditioning coach at NCAA, you think legally I can talk to my athletes about cannabis? I never said a word. It was something private I did at the time. I only did it in the evening after I was finished working, never during the day. And it was a recovery thing for me. But during COVID, when the NCAA was kind of, struggling, I was like, oh, I'm going to go get my master's. And I was like, what do I want to get my master's in? This is kind of where I pivoted a little bit. I was just like, man, I'm interested in cannabis, but I don't know what I want to research in cannabis. What pathways are there? We were talking about somebody earlier was like, oh, when I was in college, there were no pathways to be a cannabis scientist. Let me make it very clear. There was not one for me either. Okay, just pause there. There was not a pathway. I was a college strength conditioning coach with a medical license that was growing in my home, growing some good stuff, by the way. And at the time, when I left the NCAA, I worked at a dispensary for less than a year. So I managed 3 dispensaries for the largest privately owned cannabis company in the United States. It's called PharmaCann, which at the time, nobody here even knew what it was. It was just a job opportunity. As a veteran, these giant companies went around Chicago calling veterans, trying to hire them. Because I don't know how other states are, but in our state, I now know when you hire veterans or people who are from a community that have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs, or people that have records, I realize now that it checks a box for those companies, right? And that's the nice way I'll say it. But during that time, during that 8 months working for this big company, I felt like I got to like the end of the yellow brick road and got to see the wizard behind the curtain. And I was just like, yo, nobody knows what they're doing. Everybody's making these public claims about how much they know about cannabis and who's the experts and who's the leaders. But I've been the one receiving the documentation from the grower at our dispensary. I see the THC percentages. I see when things fail. I see the supply chains. And I was just like, as stable as people think this is publicly, again, what I say about deployment, don't watch the news because it's not, you're not getting an accurate depiction of what's really going on with cannabis. But I had a crazy experience. I met the CEO of the company that I worked for at the time. And when I met him, he was like, hey, man, you seem really smart, really brilliant, blah, blah, blah. And during the conversation, I was talking to him about cannabinoids, terpenes, the endocannabinoid system, educating through the retail. And he was just like, hey, man, you're not going to work here long. And I was like, yo, I'm about to get fired. Did I say something wrong? He's like, nah, man, this is retail. Would you go to Target and ask the cashier at Target about the Aveeno lotion and how the lotion with oats is better for your skin cells? But no, no, you wouldn't have that conversation. And he essentially told me, like, you're a manager of a retail store.
Yep.
So I went back to school and got my master's degree in cannabis in biology, doing cannabis research.
And that's one of the big things that I think a lot of folks don't realize when they walk into a dispensary. There are a lot of designer cannabises out there. A lot of folks that are just trying to get that high THC and don't have so much focus on the healing behind what terpenes and what combinations of terpenes really do help individuals out. And when you walk into a dispensary, oftentimes it's really indica versus sativa versus a hybrid. And the more you study and you start to get to know these terpenes and what really helps people, you learn that's really not the case at all. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of that, Steve?
Yeah, so that actually my breakthrough moment at the dispensary. So we had papers that advertised a certain cultivar or a certain strain. I'm gonna say Blue Dream for an example. So it would say Blue Dream. It would say the typical terpenes, and then it would say THC between 17 and 19. Okay. I was the inventory manager, so I was the one who had to confirm that THC on the jars matched the THC that was on the paper in the government system legally. So I'm looking at our advertisement and then looking at the paper and like, yo, this don't match. This is like 23% THC. And then the next time it's 16. Then the next time it's 17.5. And then it's 32. And then it's 28. And I'm like, oh, shit, this is like fruit and vegetables. This is going to be different every single time. And that was the light bulb. I was just like, oh, there's something, there's something there. Like, why would we put up these permanent advertisements for something that's always changing, something that can be seasonal, something that, you know what I mean? And that's when I got interested in the profiles. The specific event that happened was I learned about pinene. So pinene causes vasodilation, meaning, right, it causes an increase in your capacity to take a deeper breath, but it also can enhance memory retention. So I essentially said this: if a veteran comes in and we say cannabis helps PTSD, very general sentence. And it's an overstatement because not all cannabis will help somebody's PTSD. In fact, some cannabis may exacerbate adverse PTSD symptoms. I found out pinene enhances memory retention. Well, what do you think maybe we don't want a veteran to experience if they're looking to actually have memory suppression, right? Because that's one of the things that helps when people say they sleep. It reduces their REM sleep. When you do reduce REM sleep, you reduce dreams. So a lot of veterans don't have hallucinations and nightmares because they consume cannabis. Cannabis reduces REM sleep. REM sleep reduces dreams, right?
Fact.
So I kind of think that was it for me, where I was just like, man, if we sell a veteran something with pinene, and that pinene has memory enhancing, effects on this person, and they have an episode, and then on the news it says this veteran did XYZ, and it's because we always know how it's framed, it's because of cannabis. That's not only neglect, but that's something that could have been easily avoided, right? With a little communication and transparency through packaging and informing the consumer the way they should as somebody who's spending their money. So yeah, that was kind of like how the specific science of cannabis led me to want to go get my biology, or excuse me, my master's degree in environmental biology.
That's one of the things that I first realized when I started consuming cannabis, post-service when, I stopped drinking. Actually, before I'd even heard of Cali Sober, I started consuming cannabis in low doses, just some little tarts, and I quickly learned that there were actually some strains that I would try that didn't help. Some of them would actually give me anxiety, some did help me with sleep, some did help me with focus, but they weren't all good for me. And so it was imperative for myself to keep track of what worked and what didn't, and I wanted a deeper understanding of what is it inside this particular strain that I like or don't like, and so that's why I came out with my book, Strains for Pain, so I could kinda keep track of what was working for me and what specific terpenes were in those strains that did have the most benefits for me, such as sleep.
Yeah, and I think so. Again, along with the what if there's something in this one that does cause anxiety. I think the other side of it was we discontinue stuff. You know what I mean? There'd be a moment where somebody's like, "Hey, that that sour diesel that you all have, that sour diesel is exactly what I need to help with X, Y, and Z." They come in one day and we say, "Hey, ma'am, that company actually discontinued that sour diesel," and they're like, "Wait, what? I've never tried anything else. That's the only thing that's ever worked for me." And then the next thing you give them is a completely different profile because you're not experienced. You go for something that's popular. So instead of considering what type of profile a traditional sour diesel might have and going, "Ooh, what if I can find something with some limonene, some lemonade? What if I find something citrusy that has a certain aroma, flavor, smell profile to it?" Just to gamble, right? Because I don't know. But just knowing that it has a similar smell profile, if it tests that has a similar chemical profile, maybe I don't even look at the name, and that's what I recommend versus just saying, "Oh, you loved our sour diesel? Well, cool. We don't have that anymore. You should try Blue Dream." And you're like, "Hey, Blue Dream has a completely different chemical profile. It's likely going to have a different effect."
Completely
And I
different.
think that's like when the levels of science not reaching the dispensary don't benefit the consumer, but also that's why I was like, I have to do something crazy. Like I can't just do a normal, I got my degree, it was for me. Like I have to do something impactful that will like move the needle. So even while I was a graduate student, I started going to local policy meetings, town hall meetings. I started learning about how we even got the laws to create legal medical, then how the law became adult recreational use. I started meeting the people who've been going to the government for 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, petitioning for this stuff, even when we as the public didn't know these fights were happening in private. I started meeting the parents of sick children. I started meeting people with cancer and HIV. I started meeting veterans, and all these people were like, actively, regularly talking to our aldermen and our legislators and our policymakers. And I was like, hey, I feel bad as a millennial because as a millennial, like we grew up like Rage Against the Machine. It's like, yeah, I'm active duty, but also like, don't tell me what to do. I'm active duty so people can be free. That's why. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
right. So it was one of those like, I don't know. It's just a. I think it was a different experience for me to go back to school because I knew I was taking a big risk. So if I wanted to do anything with cannabis. I was like, man, you could kind of like ruin your public image. Honestly, that was the first thing I thought about. I know Marines that smoked cannabis and they're shut-ins now. You know what I mean? Like they work their job, they mind their business, they got their page 11, you know, they got their other than honorable discharge. So I made sure that I understood the laws that supported any work that I wanted to do. And I understood the licenses required for the school to be able to legally allow me to do those things. Also, having my connections that I had in the industry, having worked for this big company, I made sure that I was like, hey, I am not just some, like, I know you guys think like, oh, it's just some pothead in the basement. He wants to research weed because it's on the ballot to be legalized. Like, no, that was never the case. I worked at this dispensary. There's some science behind the both production value and the living organism that is a cannabis plant. And I think that we should learn the correlation between that value that we see as a good, right, as a product, and we should learn the biological relevance to the CBD, THC. What's the biological relevance to the living organism before we turn it into a good? It's the same as corn. We know so much about corn. We know a crazy amount about corn, but we don't just discard corn to talk about alcohol. It's a separate product, right?
Yes.
So it should be conceived of and processed and regulated and treated as a separate product. I always joke like blueberries and grapes and everything. Sure, little kids have them, don't think about them. Take them and ferment them, right? That's an illegal product now for those same children. So we don't regulate blueberries and grapes like we regulate wine and mead. You know what I mean? Like that would be ridiculous. So that's kind of what I started processing when I learned the laws around hemp versus marijuana and the scientific term cannabis being separate from both of those legal terms. I was like, oh, there's some doors I can knock on using science and objective data. So that's kind of what I did.
So when you started to study and research cannabis, you started studying trichomes, is that right?
That is correct. So there's a book. I hope you can see it. It's right there. It's called Interpreting. Interpreting, like interpret, but with the N. So interpreting. And it is the art and science of what Max Montrose, the author and publisher, called being a cannabis sommelier. What interested me about taking this course is while I was working at the dispensary, I'm comparing, like, I got a lot of bud I get to look at now, right? I'm like, you know, instead of just being at your homie's house, I would just analyze, look at them. I had to inspect packages. And I was looking at different I was like, man, the trichomes look different on this one than they did a couple months ago. So then as a manager, I hit up the growers like, hey, the trichomes look different. Yeah, man. So look, the AC went out for 2 days, right? And when the air conditioner went out for 2 days, they went through a drought, right? And when they went through a drought, the only ones that survived were the ones that had really dense, thick buds that could retain moisture, what we usually don't want, versus the ones that were more wispy and leafy and they could have air come in between them and dry them. But the ones that survived, the trichomes got huge, bigger than it. And it's like, oh, guess what? That environmental stress cause just increased your trichome density effect. And that's kind of where I was just like, oh, I can take my knowledge of what I know, learning this book, got certified as an interpreter, learning the art and science of both the trichomes on the plant as an anatomical feature. That's what it is. There's leaves, there's roots, there's shoots, there's trichomes, right? So learning the biological purpose of the plant, but also understanding the value, that's when I was just kind of like, all right, how can I do this at a university legally? So we had a hemp license, right? Because there's a 7,000 square foot greenhouse at my school. I convinced the president, the lawyer of the school, and the biology department chair to allow me to do my master's research on cannabis sativa L. This is where you play word games.
Right.
Okay. Cannabis sativa L is hemp.
Yes.
Right. According to Carl Linnaeus, the person who named it, the father of taxonomy, how we name things. So I was like, oh, I got a biological argument from the father of modern biology. I didn't know the guy who invented the modern naming system in biology. When you say like all these crazy like Latin names, that dude named cannabis sativa. So I took that argument to the department chair of the biology department, and I said, respectably, ma'am. She said, what organism do you want to study? Biology. It's got to be a living organism. Plant, animal. I said, yeah. Cannabis sativa. She said, what? I said, cannabis sativa. She said, you want to study cannabis? I said, no. I want to study cannabis sativa L. The L is for Linnaeus, Carl Linnaeus. You're the chair of biology. So, we respect him. He's the father of modern biology. And when I ran this script, it worked in a way that I never expected it to work. So for that person who said there was a pathway, there wasn't. I saw a narrow gap, and I was like, maybe I can force that gap open if I educate the people who have power. Take a second and everybody write that down. Educate the people that have power. You can put that on your wall. So the school said, yeah, you can do your research as long as it's hemp, you're good. Step one. Step two, I actually taught at a local college that was only like 10 minutes away from where I was getting my master's degree. That community college was given a license to cultivate, infuse, and transport cannabis the day that adult use became recreationally legal here in Illinois. In the adult use recreational bill, there was a small section for 7 community colleges. The licenses that everybody fought for in Illinois for 3 years, 7 community colleges got them for free. And nobody did anything with it because everybody was focused on adult use. Nobody was looking over here at the Illinois Community College Vocational Cannabis Pilot Program. People didn't know what that was. People hadn't heard of that. They didn't know what it was. Again, because of my experience, I started reading the fine print. I said, if you're at a community college, you can grow, you can infuse, you can test. As long as you're teaching students, you can do this legally in the state of Illinois, and nobody's doing it. And that's when I was just like, I'll be at the head of that movement. I don't care. I'm already doing the research 10 minutes away. I'm doing my master's research. I took that opportunity to go work at that community college for the city colleges of Chicago. I believe it's one of the 2 largest community college systems in the country. And we had a 5,000 square foot greenhouse where we worked with the University of Illinois, University of Wisconsin, Michigan State, and a couple other schools. We were the only community college and the only indoor grow, but we grew floral hemp cannabis. We grew it indoor in a greenhouse, and the students got to experience it. A lot of them got their associate's degrees. Some of them ended up getting dispensary licenses years later. And that was all from, again, the state having a pathway, me going, I'm getting my master's, but how do I help the community? I went and taught at the community college. And through that Illinois Community College Vocational Pilot Program, that created the pathway for those students to get the experience to learn how to grow. And then that was a launch pad really for a lot of my work, because then it became public. And then I started meeting people from other states, other veterans from other countries, people from Thailand, people from Ireland, other researchers and scientists that were interested in my trichome research. If you're interested in my trichome research, it was trichome microscopy. Think about when you're a kid and you take you look at anything under a microscope, you use light to look at what you're looking at under the microscope. The light is what helps you magnify it, right? The type of microscope I used uses darkness. How do you look at something in darkness? So we actually put the cannabis sample, I would cut it off of the plant live. I wouldn't dry it, I wouldn't cure it. I wanted it in its natural state. I wanted to observe undisturbed what the biological organism looked like. We grew these big, beautiful female floral plants. Everybody was like, I think that's weed. I said, no, it's cannabis and it's hemp. It's floral. You all are confused because you've been told that's marijuana, right? So it was just this interesting experience. But I took these pictures under the electron microscope from a local grower who was able to give me samples for my research. So this was something separate. And I took the pictures. I would put the cannabis in liquid nitrogen, fresh, cut it off the plant, dip it in liquid nitrogen, try to freeze it instantly. I would put it in essentially a box, and I would suck all the air out and make it like an empty vacuum. So there's no oxygen in there. just this cannabis sample. It's gonna sound real Star Wars. Just stay with me for like 2 seconds. There's a bar of tungsten steel. Okay, we electrocute the tungsten steel, and like a cosmic beam shoots out of the tungsten steel when you electrocute it. That beam knocks the electrons out of the cannabis plant. But the cannabis plant is frozen, so it's essentially trying to resist being hit by the Silver Surfer at full force, right? But in those moments while you're blasting it, there's electrons that are actually bouncing off the plant around the room. And we have detectors that collect those electrons and make an image of what that looks like. Essentially, if you were Ant-Man, like standing on a cannabis plant, looking out. And I got some images we can share if you want, but that trichome microscopy work, along with the other experiences I had, the trichome microscopy work is really what like helped me kind of launch into a different stratosphere of global cannabis researchers, honestly.
And from that, you actually were able to create a database from what you had learned and what you had kind of co-facilitated with other teachers, correct?
Yeah, so part of the program that we did at Olive Harvey, like I said, we used that Illinois vocational pilot program to legally get a license and grow hemp in the greenhouse. I didn't just want to grow hemp for no reason. I also know that sometimes being a part of a bigger project helps you as a new school. So that program was called the Hemp Midwest Database, and there was also a cultivar check program. So the floral hemp that we were growing, and all these other schools were growing in different states, we were growing for compliance. So before a farmer goes out and says, "Hey, I want to get in the CBD market, I want to grow a bunch of floral hemp," and they grow it and find out it's 1, 2, 4, 5% THC, right? Way above high. And now you just wasted your money. You got to burn it. It's bad for the environment. The whole process is unfortunate for everybody involved. But as researchers, our tax dollars go to the school gives money to do research, and that research is supposed to help farmers in our community. So all of our schools grew the same cultivars of floral hemp in different locations, and we would submit samples at week 3, week 6, week 9, week 12 of flowering, and we would compare the data based on where we were, the different growing methods, and see how these same cultivars, what type of expression we could get in different environments. And that's what the students grew in the greenhouse. And at the end of them growing their plants, they got to cut it, put it in a paper bag. Crazy part about it, I got a label from the state of University of Illinois to label the stuff because I had to take it to USPS and put it in the mail. Floral hemp in a paper bag, bro.
I bet that felt illegal as hell.
And a couple times I was just like, "Yo, you can't really smell it." That was like week 3, week 6. Week 12, I'm sending floral hemp in the mail legally, again, with a letter from the University of Illinois. This is all state compliant, not breaking any rules. However, when those terpenes from that floral hemp hit, it smells like you got dope in the post office.
Yep, you could smell it for sure.
Yeah, so yeah, it was a cool program for the students to get that. They all still talk about it. They let me know. Like I said, some of them are dispensary owners now, which is crazy. But they're like, thanks to that program that they had at the school, and I was fortunate enough to be a part of that program that kind of helped those, it did what it was supposed to do for the limited time that it was open and running. It helped people with their pathways to business or jobs.
On that note, Steve, can you give us kind of a breakdown of the endocannabinoid system, why it matters for recovery, mood, pain, sleep, things like that? Something that maybe most people really don't understand about our endocannabinoid system?
Yeah, this is my favorite topic. We probably gonna end up doing a part 2 on this. But I would say the most interesting thing about the endocannabinoid system is the endocannabinoid system was discovered, or I don't want to say discovered, I don't like using that word. We learned about the endocannabinoid system in the 80s and 90s. As scientists, we learned about THC and CBD in the 60s. So if you take a step back, we learned about the plants first, because people have been consuming cannabis for thousands of years. We don't know why. Originally, they thought cannabis was like alcohol. When you consume alcohol, it doesn't just affect one organ. Alcohol has a systemic effect on your body. It floods the bloodstream and goes everywhere. So originally, they thought when people consume cannabis, one of the theories was maybe when people consume cannabis, it just causes systemic dysfunction. That's why people get dysregulated. That's why they get hot. They can't move. And they feel sluggish. The stereotypes. That was the original thought process. Well, once they isolated CBD and THC in the 60s, they were like, if these are the most dominant molecules in the plant, there must be somewhere in the body where these molecules are doing the work that they do. Then you start a race for what? Okay, there's got to be something in the body, you know what I mean, that works with these molecules. Not only did they find out, yes, CBD and THC have a place that they act on or bind to in the human body. We now call them CB1 and CB2 receptors. Those are the two primary receptors in the endocannabinoid system. And I hate simplifying the locks and key system because it's definitely more of a gates and bridges. That's a better way to think about it. But the CB1 and CB2 receptors are the gates and bridges that really get to control the flow, right? And the modulation of THC and CBD when ingested. So step one, you discover THC and CBD in the plant. Step two, you discover CB1 and CB2 receptors. Wait, that doesn't make sense. Why are we finding CB1 and CB2 receptors in people that don't consume THC and CBD? Oh, that means that those receptors are not exclusive to THC and CBD. They clearly have another purpose. Not just because we found it in humans, but it's been found in mice and dogs and horses and invertebrates, right? And all these different, why do these organisms that don't consume THC and CBD have a binding site for THC and CBD? Well, my favorite thing about science is somebody in the 80s and 90s was like, theoretically, we must make something that's similar to THC and CBD. That's a crazy light bulb moment. And I don't think that they get enough credit for that, because to think about the consumption of THC and CBD, learn we have receptors where THC and CBD work, and then figure out, I think we might make our own version of it. And that's when we find out about anandamide, right? And 2-AG.
And do you want to talk a little bit about what that means for a lot of our listeners? Because for some of our listeners, this is the first time they've actually heard even about the endocannabinoid system and what that impacts in our body and how that impacts our body. So really, if you could you explain how our EC1 and EC2 can impact the human body?
Yeah, so obviously once people discovered, hey, even people that don't consume THC and CBD, and definitely these animals that we know aren't getting high behind our backs like Secret Life of Pets, they're not consuming THC and CBD. We all have these receptors and we all make these natural molecules. What is their purpose? Because the animals aren't always high and everybody else is not always just walking around high. Now we got to figure out what's going on. The cool thing is the molecules are very similar, not identical. People say identical, they are not identical. But THC and CBD are very similar to anandamide and 2-AG. Hence, they both interact with the same lock or key, right? They both have the same interaction on the same bridges. It's just the difference is how much your natural system can affect those bridges versus how much THC and CBD can control them. So in your body, when you consume THC, it does flood your whole bloodstream, which is helpful for people to have, MS, seizures, different things like that. When your body is producing anandamide and anandamide and 2-AG, even though they're the same as what came in the plant, they don't affect your body the same, right? So people say, well, they look the same. They affect the same place. They affect your body differently. So even though anandamide is similar to THC, it does have effects of bliss similar to THC. It can have kind of a what they call runner's high effect, right? Which is how they kind of know about anandamide. And that is kind of where we realize the endocannabinoid system is a stress monitoring and stress circuit breaker system. That is kind of one of the most simple ways to like, you understand what your heart does. That's a cardiovascular system, right? You understand that you have different organs. Each of those organs has a system that has a name. The most basic way to think about it is the endocannabinoid system is a cell system, meaning it's everywhere. It's in your brain, it's in your eyes, it's in your ears, it's in your feet, it's in your toes, it's in your muscles, it's in your bones, it's in your ligaments. This system is literally found almost everywhere in the body except your brainstem, which is why you can't overdose, because your breathing mechanics and your brainstem are typically what make people overdose. If they consume opioids or alcohol, triggers the brainstem, their breathing stops. That's how people overdose. Because the lack of receptors in the brainstem, that's why people, I mean, you can pass out, you can get sick, you can get anxious, you know what I mean? But outside of that, the actual like loss of function of your breathing doesn't happen because those receptors, thank God for making us this way, are not in the brainstem. So that's why it's kind of cool. It's a circuit breaker system for everywhere in your body, but it's not in a really important location that affects your breathing, if that location ever got overstimulated.
That's some really amazing information. I appreciate you sharing that with us. I think one of the big things that I would like to give a better understanding of is your recommendation for specific terpenes, maybe for any of our listeners or specifically our veterans, to look for. Some that would help for focus, PTSD, pain, inflammation for daytime use, and then what terpenes do you recommend, or terpenes and CBD, CBG, CBN type cannabinoids for nighttime? What do you, from your studies and research, what do you find the best combinations to be most valuable for people?
Yeah, and because my research was again more focused on like the living organism in the plant, this is coming more from my experience, right? So I'm not giving like a scientific recommendation. Also, because we now know that there's terpenes, but there's a bunch of other different molecules, right, that are involved in, some people call it the entourage effect, some people call it the ensemble effect. So this is kind of what I tell people. You have to go back to like basic, almost like shopping, right? So when you're inexperienced with something, hey, you start low. You don't start with what your friend recommended. Hey man, I take 150 milligram gummy every day. It helps me. It helps me, man. It's the only way I can get through the day. If an inexperienced or a novice consumer goes ahead and does that, that could be a really unfair and adverse experience. And I'm putting it lightly, right? They may have a really bad experience. So I always tell people, start with something extremely low and make sure that you do it at the same time each day. That's the best way to do, like, I call it supplementation. So for me, as I got older, I was like, oh, I don't actually want to inhale and combust as much anymore. But if I look at this like supplementation, I wake up in the morning, I take my multivitamin, I take my B vitamin, I take my omega 3s. Oh, omega 3s are involved in the endocannabinoid system. I should also take some CBD and some CBG and a little bit of THC as well, right? So that's when it becomes more like supplementation. And the truth is, everybody's supplementation is different. Everybody consumes a different amount of protein, carbs, and fats every day. I make that nutrition analogy because it's relevant. Your endocannabinoid system is directly related to your metabolism and what you consume, your diet, what you put in your body. So what works for you not only is different from me, it can change from when you're older, when you're younger, if you're pregnant, when you're going through different phases of your life, if you're training for an event versus if you're sedentary. Your endocannabinoid system, because it's a circuit breaker, it will change its baseline. That baseline, what we call in science, is homeostasis. People think homeostasis means balance. It's less balance than it is an actual circuit breaker. Balance, you think of like home, calm, you know what I mean? Like very relaxed. When the endocannabinoid system is not calm, it's actively monitoring and adjusting. That I wouldn't call that calm. You know what I mean? I would call that an active system. So that's just one of the like easier ways to think about the system. It's involved with your diet and nutrition, right? It's directly involved with your sleep and your stress. So anything, what I tell people is, and this is a more like, this is me as a spiritual person just conveying this, we're humans having a sensory experience. Everything that your brain senses, so see, touch, taste, hear, and feel, it has an effect on your brain. Sometimes it has a good effect on your brain. Sometimes it stresses your brain out. And if you stress your brain out, what we now know from different public neuroscience research, your brain can degenerate from stress. Not an active fight. Your brain can degenerate from stress, from sensory stress, right? That means we are obligated to then take a moment to actually like decompress outside of the sensory stress experience. And that's kind of what I think people should look at this as, more of a, again, like I said earlier, hey, I have ankle pain, so I can't walk. Well, if you don't walk, you're also going to gain weight, which is going to make your ankle hurt worse. So that's called a positive feedback. You're in a cycle that's stuck. Well, that's just my destiny. Or maybe there's a positive option for you. Maybe there's something that's non-toxic. Maybe there's something that's plant-based. Maybe there's something that's organic. Maybe there's something that's local. Wouldn't it be magical if that thing existed? If it was non-combustible, if it was something you could take orally, topically, subdermally, what if that could be the reason that, hey, now, somebody's grandmother, doesn't die from something that was preventable? You got to think about it. We live in probably one of the most advanced countries on the planet, but we die from the most preventable diseases, right? So for me, that's why I'm like, cannabis has a more supplementary viewpoint as far as I'm concerned. So I don't give people exactly like, you should take exactly this much creatine. I tell people, no, you should start with this much creatine and you should work your way up and see how you feel, first 15 days, first 30 days. Same thing with cannabis. People start with 2.5. I tell people, if you've never smoked or combusted before, don't smoke or combust. Start with something that may be a beverage, right? If you have specific pain, like something local, start with a topical. You don't have to get high and have your whole body have an effect. You can have a local topical effect. Hey, maybe I'm somebody who has back pain. Hey, they got a patch you can put on your back, and it'll slowly release CBG and THC for the next 8 hours while you're working. So you don't have to go pop a gummy or smoke or do anything. It'll just be released into your bloodstream through this patch. These are other options for people to have, but you got to find what method works best for you first. Combustible, non-combustible, smoke, vape, edible, topical, tincture, subdermal, suppository. Don't forget about IBS, endometriosis, PCOS. That's an option for you, but those are methods. Then you get into the actual formula. What's in it? THC, CBD, CBN, like, it's such an experimental process. And I think journaling is most important, right? And starting low and go up, because you can't start high and then start decreasing, get it high. But if you start low and you're like, hey, I did this for 14 days and now I know how it feels. I'm gonna take 7 days off and clear my system out, and I'm gonna try something different for 14 days. That's all we do in science. And now everybody is into the sports science because we have Fitbits and watches, and I track how many steps. And if I walk this many steps, I know exactly what my weight will be. Cool. You should track your cannabis use the same way you track your fitness. And if you're not tracking either one, you should track both.
Amen. Steven, you covered so much good information. We are a little bit over on time, but I want to keep going a little bit longer as long as you're okay with that. And can we talk about some of your current work, some of your current research, especially with athletes in cannabis?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, when I was a strength conditioning coach, kind of felt hypocritical being a medical patient, growing, consuming, having athletes that I know if they consume, they'll get in trouble. But also when I learned about the endocannabinoid system, then Michael Phelps starts making a little more sense. Then Sha'Carri Richardson starts making a little more sense. Then my good friend, and I'm proud to call this man a brother, Ricky Williams, starts making sense, right? So for me, I was just like, well, as a veteran, if I tell my story confidently, if I use objective data, right, and not a whole lot of opinion, I think that I may sway people who are anti, but also empower people that have been ridiculed and feel like I gotta just hide in the shadows. You know what I mean? Like, even though this is the only way I can get through my life, I gotta hide. You know what I mean? So um I'm trying to think of how this even really started. You know, one way is locally here in Chicago, there's an organization called Runners High Shy, right? And the people who run Runners High Shy, they've built genuine community in Chicago, like other runners clubs. But so many runners clubs run to bars,
Yeah.
right? Not only does our generation not drink as much, not only is alcoholism, ruining a lot of our families, but scientifically, running and then downing alcohol after any workout is not necessarily the best thing for your body, right? Um, so Runners High Shy is genuinely just a group of people who like to consume cannabis, but also like to go on walks and clean up the community and clean up, sidewalks, go on hikes, go camping, go on 5Ks regularly, and really showing like breaking that stigma for like the lazy stoner. There's just all the negative stuff about stoners. So that's kind of like a local organization that I would call those people athletes. I would say they're into fitness, right? I just said everybody's kind of into fitness now, so it's cool having a group like Runners High Shot that does something like that. On the other side, my consulting company, Anzisha Consulting, Anzisha Consulting, my business partner I was telling you about earlier, we actually work with athletes like Ricky Williams and his brand Heisman, and we've actually produced content like educational. I would call it like infotainment, kind of mini docu-series, really just trying to tell people like, a your endocannabinoid system is already involved when you do meditation, when you run, when you swim, when you eat, when you sleep. So you should learn about it because it's genuinely involved in the most important aspects of both your life performing and your life recovery. So that's obviously part of it. The other side of it is we wanted to really create a platform for athletes and, like I said, other fitness individuals who are currently consuming, or like Ricky Williams is one of the greatest NFL running backs ever. Not subjectively because he's a friend of mine now, or because I watched him on TV growing up as a fan, but because he is in the top 5, I believe, running backs ever to have played football. Ricky Williams is also not in the NFL Hall of Fame because of the stigma that surrounded his career when he was breaking all these records, consuming cannabis to break the records. Right? That's one of the most contradictory please perform, right? Perform for the organization, but we don't really understand what you need to perform. And at this point, after coaching in the NCAA and having friends that have played pro sports, I probably know 50 or 60 athletes that they consume now afterwards, and some of them consume during. I've talked to NFL players that are still active playing now, and some of them have said as many as like 60 to 70% of the entire NFL is consuming. The NBA stopped drug testing. Everybody said, oh, it was so magical. Well, I've heard, again, I don't have the data, but I've heard as much as 70 to 80% of the NBA consume some form of cannabis, right? So at that point, I was like, we got to start getting ready for this public conversation so that veterans and athletes can merge together and amplify the conversation of performance and recovery. And there's a portion of my career called high performance populations, and veterans and athletes both fit in that population. Excuse me.
It's interesting you bring that up. My last on podcast interview was with a gentleman named Chris McKinney, who was ranked number 18 in the world in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he uses cannabis. He's actually competed in an event called High Rollers, where they consume cannabis and then they go and they fight, and he's won that competition 2 times. He won 13th in the world in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. His girlfriend is ranked number 1 in the world in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and use cannabis not just for recovery, but for lots of medicinal reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's
You're on
the
mute.
interesting point we're at now. We're like, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. You're good.
Okay. We're at the point now where we're not just like, hey, I want to educate people so that I can break the stigma. Now we're educating people like, hey, you know how people talk about caffeine? Go Google caffeine and performance on YouTube. You'll find a million hits. Go Google creatine and performance. You'll find a million hits. B12. Everybody's an expert on supplements now. I had to go earn that degree right there in kinesiology, human performance, and nutrition, right? But everybody's an expert now on social media because they got Chat GPT and all this other information. But the truth is, these supplements are like, it's a lot deeper, right? We're talking about like altering a lot of our normal states, whether it's our sleep, whether it's our appetite, right? GLP-1, you know, when people are taking these different things, I think it's important that people understand what happens to your body when you put certain things in it, right? But with the endocannabinoid system, you don't have to put anything in your body to trigger the system. That's the difference. So ways you can trigger your endocannabinoid system, the easiest one is walking or running, right? That's why the runner's high, we thought originally was endorphins. Endorphins are another molecule that helps the system. So endorphins would be like your natural opioid system. So we know there's opioids that you can take, like I was talking about, and then you have a natural opioid system, which again, not as strong, but it has, right, some of those similar effects. Well, a scientist came out not too long ago and said, hey, I don't think endorphins are what cause the runner's high because they're not produced in the brain and they don't cross the blood-brain barrier. So how could they have an effect on the brain? Somebody said, well, there must be something else that's causing this effect. Let's just look at all the receptors across your brain and let's see what the highest density of receptors are on your brain. You got opioid receptors, you have nicotine receptors, you have all these different receptors across your brain cell. You have more CB1 receptors than all of those receptors, right? Ding, ding, ding. Great potential place for the runner's high, for this to be part of that pathway that triggers the runner's high. So that's why running, meditating, physical activity, whenever you're doing something and you start off like, oh, I was in the yard working, the first 5 minutes sucked. And then 30 minutes later, I forgot that I was even gardening. That moment of with somebody, some people, that's a runner's high. That is a moment where your body and your brain essentially merge and they meet. And your brain says, hey, you don't need to think about this much because the body actually knows what it's doing. And the body is going, if I do this at the right pace, I won't trigger and stress the brain out. Actually, walking, running, jogging, hiking, there's a pace for everybody where you can keep going. Oh, I did 5 minutes. Oh, wow, I did 10. Yo, I walked for an hour. I've never walked for an hour. Your endocannabinoid system is responding to the slow stress that you're giving me. Or in my field, we call it progressive overload.
It's amazing, and I love hearing more and more of this information come out. It's just not being discussed, I feel like, broadly enough, and I something you'd mentioned earlier is educate those in power because so much of this is unknown, especially by those in charge of the laws and the policies. So, I'm super grateful for you and for sharing everything you have with us today. Um, Let me ask, where is the science heading next in this area of discussion?
Yeah, so kind of two things. So the NCAA in 2024 removed cannabinoids from the banned substance list. Obviously, that was a massive catalyst, right, in a lot of the drug testing that's been going on that I mentioned a long time ago. That became a catalyst for me to go, okay, I'm glad that the NCAA took this step. However, I don't want college athletes aged 18 to 23 years old to go out, get a hold of some gas station stuff, get sick, and then the NCAA go, see, this is why we didn't let you have it in the first place. When there's athletes who are obviously benefiting from this. So I decided, along with my company, Anzisha Consulting, Ricky Williams, and some of the other scientists and doctors that I know in the industry, we created a course or a program called ACEs. And ACEs stands for Athletes, Cannabinoids, in the Endocannabinoid System. And this course is essentially a detailed dive into kind of everything we've been talking about from different perspectives. Like I said, from a professional athlete, from myself as a veteran and a strength conditioning coach, from a pharmacist who understands the medicinal effects, how these molecules move and interact in your body. We really brought all these people together to educate not the doctors, not the scientists. I think they can learn from this. I think the general population can learn from this. But we made this for the athletes. We made this to empower the people that have questions, the people who say, if I consume CBD, will I pop on a drug test? What's the difference between CBD and THC? How does my appetite affect my endocannabinoid system? What's the munchies? All these different questions, like athletes are really particular. High level athletes, high performance athletes. And I want to make this clear. When I say high performance, I'm talking about EMTs, firefighters, police officers, first responders, along with athletes and people who are in the military. Those people who end up having a small margin for error, sometimes zero margin for error, and their body is what determines that margin for error, only certain people understand that stress. So we want to make sure that those high performance populations know you don't have to go to alcohol first. You don't have to go to opioids if you're like, hey, my job is killing me, my back is killing me, there's no other options, I gotta perform because the margin for error is zero. There are non-THC versions of products that are still cannabis, that's not mutually exclusive, right? You can have a non-THC cannabis product, but there's also ways to explore cannabis that involves THC if you feel like that kind of may be a pathway for you. So that's why we created ACEs. And yeah, we're working on connecting with NCAA schools and other professional sports organizations. Hopefully we can get in touch with the Olympics and the NCAA now that cannabis has been, we got the Schedule 3 incoming, I think officially in January of next year. And really that Schedule 3 was part of the basis behind all of the other banning and prohibition of cannabis within organizations like WADA, the World Anti-Drug Agency, in the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency. So we hope that we can meet them with scientists like myself, other researchers, and educate, again, the people in power to then say, hey, we don't want to just broadly remove cannabinoids from the banned substance list. We want to remove it and then educate and empower the athletes who are the ones who will be affected by the policy. So that's what ACEs is for.
That sounds phenomenal, and I wish you all the best of luck, especially with the Olympics, because you're talking about doing this with world-class athletes. That's phenomenal.
Yeah, and we have, the good thing is we have Olympic athletes that are retired. Shout out Amy Van Dyken. She is a good friend of mine now. We've done some podcasts and things together. Amy, I believe, was a 6-time gold medalist, Olympic swimmer. She had a ATV accident, I believe, and she became paralyzed from the waist down. And she has become one of the biggest advocates who has Olympic gold medals, who's been on the front of a Wheaties box to come support us live, you know what I mean? And really speak up for the athletes who don't have a voice. And I'm not saying that for myself, I'm saying that because she's taken on that challenge and she's met that expectation. So that's one athlete. Ricky Williams is one NFL player. And truth be told, there are hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of athletes, not just in our country, but around the world. Also, along with these firefighters and these first responders, they can all benefit from putting their bodies on the line to perform and to make money from some form of cannabis. And again, it doesn't always have to be THC. So, yeah, that's my next mission.
What message would you like veterans specifically, maybe they're on the fence about trying out cannabis, what would you like them to take away from this?
Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier, and just based on the world that we live in, I won't sugarcoat it. For any veteran who's kind of like stood at that door, a lot of us have been at that same door, right? To some of our friends and people who we've lost. And I think having a friend come to me and tell me, if you don't like the way that you feel in the life, in the body that you're living right now, you don't have to leave life. There are healthy, non-toxic alternatives that traditionally may have not been even considered. But now science has actually supported the evidence behind these natural tools to help you change your life for the better. So if you are at that door, if you feel like there's no other options, you are not alone. There are so many of us who have been at that door. And that's why we're sitting here having this conversation, as cool as we think weed is. So that's part of it. But the other part is cannabis can provide some type of physical relief, sleep ailments, memory, PTSD, and there's safe ways to go about it. So that's my message I would leave for vets.
Okay, and last question, what should people learn or unlearn about cannabis and recovery?
Ooh, that's a good one. Okay, what should people learn and unlearn about cannabis? You said cannabis fitness and recovery.
Yeah, cannabis and
Okay,
recovery.
cannabis and recovery. Um, oh man, that's so good. I would actually say the I have narcolepsy. Okay, but I consume cannabis. People would make an association that cannabis would do what to somebody with narcolepsy? Make them more sleepy. Cannabis doesn't just have one effect every time. Cannabis actually does a really good job of regulating dysfunction. So kids with epilepsy, CBD, regulated, right? Somebody who has cancer and they're going through chemotherapy and they can't keep food down. Cannabis, regulated. Somebody that has multiple sclerosis or any seizure kind of movement disorder, consume cannabis, regulated. That means that these people's systems are being regulated. Instead of just numbing the systems like we normally do with medicine, instead of just blunting the systems, right? These multiple different ailments and systems, it's not a one-all cure, but it is helping people regulate dysfunction.
Phenomenal. Thank you so much, Steve. I'm proud of you, just what you've done. You haven't sat back, but just the drive that you've taken to educate so many people and the steps that you've taken to get to where you are. I wanna say I'm truly grateful, and I love your face, man. You are amazing. Thank you so much.
I, I appreciate it, man. If I could take a second, I already talked about my company. But if I can shout out, um, a lot of people say we support the troops, and I know on our end, I know how we feel, but I know that some people they feel like it's a very superficial saying, and it's become just kind of a word instead of an action or a phrase. If you want to support veterans, but also you believe that cannabis is a pathway to healing, I'm a part of an organization called Veterans Action Council, VAC. This organization is one of the most impactful veterans organizations in our country. They are part of DEA rescheduling hearings. They go to the United Nations every year to try to get cannabis removed from the most dangerous drugs in the world list. One of the founders and originators of the organization just so happens to be the first licensed dispensary owner in the US and an Army veteran. And we really want people to understand that veterans have always been a part of the legal battles that have gone on in this country, fighting for our rights and the rights of other patients. So please support Veterans Action Council if you can.
And if anybody's looking to learn more about you and what you're currently working on, where can they find out more information about you, Steven?
Yeah, so my name, Steve Philpott Jr. I'm the junior, not the senior. If you message my dad, he'll send it to me eventually, but it's gonna take a while. And then on Instagram, I'm Coach Jackpot. So Coach spelled normally, and then Jackpot with two T's at the end. And those are pretty much my main two platforms. On Anzisha Consulting .com, I have ACES. If anybody's interested in signing up for ACES, you have an organization. If you're just interested in anything you heard about today, you can go to anzishaconsulting.com. Again, that's ANZISHA consulting.com. So yeah, that's really where you can find me. And I have these conversations all the time. This is pretty much what I do. Don't feel like you're bothering me if I don't get back to you right away. But we're all connected in this. So I really want to thank you for inviting me, for you hosting this platform. I found you because you were hosting other people, and now we're connected, and that's really how we have an impact. So thank you for holding the space.
Absolutely, my pleasure. I think it's one of the most important things is to get these stories out, especially the stories of healing and like yours, these stories of education are so important because a lot of times, like you'd mentioned, someone might find something that helps them, but they have to sit in the quiet because of a stigma. Like so many of our veterans, they have to sign a page 13 and then they get tested. to ensure that they're not consuming products like THC or even CBD. So,
Absolutely.
absolutely, thank you so much, and I will continue to be in touch. Hang on just a moment. I'll put you backstage, close us out. Wow. That's all I have to say. Big respect to Steve Philpott Jr. For sharing your journey and the science behind it. If this episode spoke to you, don't keep it to yourself. Please share it out with someone who needs to hear it. Or if someone has any more questions, share it out and do what you can to find Steve. Super knowledgeable. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and set the notifications so you don't miss future episodes like this one, because we're not just telling stories here. We're changing the conversation around what healing looks like, recovery, and the veteran experience. So until next time, lead with love, lead with change.